Hi everyone, welcome back to my author commentary for A Prince of Song and Shade. Today we are up to chapter 12. This chapter is an interesting one. We get three different interesting Talyn interactions here. First with Mithanis on her way to meet Cuinn to let him know that she's returned to Mithranar and to the Wingard. He interrupts that conversation and then she has an interaction with him. And then finally we end the chapter with her having a very interesting conversation with Theac. A great chapter. Let's jump straight into it. Right at the beginning, we have another little interesting back and forth between Talyn and Sari, in which Sari once again raises the fact that Talyn has essentially come back to Mithranar to make an alliance with a criminal, to probably very likely engage in criminal activities. And that's really quite anathema to what they used to stand for and what they used to do together. And while Talyn takes this point, I think she has such a fundamental sense that she's on the right path with this decision, even though she's not sure where it's heading or how it's going to turn out. Sari, I think, is primarily concerned that Talyn's going to be faced with a choice at some point, a very difficult choice between her home, her family, her duty, and what she's come to love in Mithranar. And I think Sari has a better sense of how deeply Talyn has become connected to Mithranar than Talyn is allowing herself to acknowledge. Talyn's view is that if things pan out the way she believes they will, she won't have to make that decision. Sari's a little more dubious of that fact. And as the book and the series plays out, I think Talyn's mostly right, but Sari also has a point here too. So just another little interaction that's quite interesting in terms of where Talyn's at right now and her motivations in what she's doing. She then runs into Mithanis, and that's a very interesting encounter. It's very sobering for Talyn. She came to the realization at the end of A Tale of Stars and Shadow that Mithanis was the real threat in Mithranar. If there was a threat that was going to come at Cuinn, it was going to be from Mithanis. He was the real source of that fear, the real source of likely why Sarana was energized to bring Cuinn some kind of outside protection outside the Wingard, because she feels that Mithanis is a threat to Cuinn. And this conversation between Talyn and Mithanis really reinforces that for Talyn. This is the first time in probably a long time, if ever, that Talyn's faced someone who has genuine advantages over her and who she probably at this stage couldn't necessarily defeat in a one-on-one interaction. His magic, his power, all of it together, his rank in Mithranar. And she's not accustomed to that. But it also makes her rethink Cuinn's behavior a little bit too. I don't think she's been very dismissive and very felt a lot of contempt for the way Cuinn behaves during her first stint in Mithranar. And she never really thought that through. But in this kind of interaction with Mithanis and the way she watches Mithanis interacting with Cuinn when Cuinn comes along, I think she starts to understand for the first time that Cuinn's behavior might be driven by self-protection and not necessarily just because he's a useless waste of space. Cuinn, of course, his instinct is to protect her. When he comes across that conversation, he uses his wings to kind of cut off Mithanis' attention from Talyn and switch it to him. She initially grasps that might have been a deliberate attempt to look out for her, but quickly dismisses it. She's still incredibly dismissive of Cuinn and hasn't seen anything so far to make her think otherwise. But he does, once Mithanis leaves and the two kind of chat, Cuinn does let slip, probably deliberately, how genuinely glad he is that she's come back to Mithranar, before engaging a little bit of banter that it essentially ends up making her laugh despite herself. She, like I said, she quite likes Cuinn when she lets herself. And I think the fact that she just had that kind of very sobering encounter with Mithanis makes her a little bit more open to Cuinn's irrepressible nature. And then we finally end the chapter on a conversation with Theac. Now, Theac's no fool. He understands who Talyn is from the perspective of her strategic ability, her warrior skills, her leadership ability, which he may not know that she's a Denorix, but he saw how she came into Mithranar and without much effort at all had an incredibly inspired wing devoted to her within a matter of weeks and months. So he understands that it's very unlikely that she came back to Mithranar of her own will just to guard the useless third prince of the Mithranar royal family. And Talyn hesitates for a very, very short period of time before just telling him the truth. Now, that's breaching a number of confidences from her home, from Shir Thoroniel, from Master Raynar, from the Callanan, from even her Denorix family, given how secret this mission is that she's on. But she really doesn't hesitate, and that is, again, I think a sign of her allowing herself to let Theac help her, like Theac be her second, trust him rather than punishing herself by doing everything on her own all the time. Now, she doesn't go as far as letting him help, which is what he kind of wants the wolves to help with her mission. She won't go that far. Talyn might be on a healing journey from Sari's loss, but the contemplation, the thought of losing someone in that way again that she cares about to that degree is simply she cannot contemplate and will not contemplate. And even I think by the end of this series is still probably her one vulnerable spot. It's not something she'll ever be willing to risk again. But yeah, she lets him in to a certain degree, but not all the way, and they end up that conversation, which flows straight into chapter 12. Flows straight into chapter 13, which I'm looking forward to jumping into as we'll get to see a bit more of the wolves again. I hope you enjoyed this chapter. If you've got any questions at all on anything I said or on any of the previous videos, please drop them in the comments below. I'd love to answer. Otherwise, I really look forward to seeing you in chapter 13, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.